Book the Fourth, Recalled to the Light. Chapter 34, Kill 'em, even if they's already dead. Reader, you did not forget about our small mouse, did you? Back to the light was what Gregory whispered to him when he wrapped Desperaux in his napkin and placed him on the tray. And then Midge, after a conversation with Oscuro, carried the tray to the kitchen, and she saw Cook. She shouted, "It's me, Midge Resow, back from the deep downs." "Ah, lovely," said Cook, "and ain't we all relieved?" Midge put the tray on the counter. "Here, here," said Cook, "your duties ain't done. You must clear it." "How's that?" shouted Midge. "You must clear the tray," shouted Cook. She reached over, took hold of the napkin, and gave it a good shake. And Desperaux tumbled out of the napkin and landed right directly plop into the measuring cup full of oil. "Ew, yuck," said the Cook. "A mouse in my kitchen and my cooking oil in my measuring cup. You, Midge, kill him directly." Midge bent her head and looked at the mouse slowly sinking to the bottom of the glass cup. "Poor little Missy," she said, and she stuck her hand into the oil and pulled him out by his tail. Desperaux, gasping and coughing and blinking at the bright light, would have wept with joy at his rescue, but he was not given time to cry. "Kill him!" shouted the Cook. "Gore!" said Midge. "All right." Holding Desperaux by the tail, she went to get the kitchen knife, but the mouse tail, covered as it was in oil, was slick and difficult to hold on to, and Midge, in reaching for the knife, loosened her grip, and Desperaux fell to the floor. Midge looked down at the little bundle of fur. "Gore," she said. "That killed him for sure." "Kill him, even if he's already dead," shouted Cook. "That's my philosophy with mice. If they're alive, kill 'em. If they're dead, kill 'em. That way you can be certain of having yourself a dead mouse, which is the only kind of mouse to have." "That's some good sophisy, that is. Kill 'em, even if they's already dead." "Hurry, you cauliflower deal fool," shouted the Cook. "Hurry!" Desperaux lifted his head from the floor. The afternoon sun was shining through the huge kitchen window, and he had time to think how miraculous the light was, and then it disappeared, and Midge's face loomed into view. She studied him, breathing through her mouth. "Little Missy," she said, "ain't you going to skedaddle?" Desperaux looked for a long moment in Midge's small, concerned eyes, and then came a blinding flash and the sound of metal moving through the air as Midge brought the knife down. Desperaux felt a very intense pain in his hindquarters, and he leapt up and into action. Reader, he scurried. He scurried like a professional mouse. He zigged to the left, he zigged to the right. "Gore!" shouted Midge. "I missed him!" "Ain't that a surprise?" said Cook, just as Desperaux scurried under a crack in the pantry door. "I got the little Missy's tail, though," said Midge. She bent up and picked up Despereaux's tail and held it up proudly, displaying it to Cook. "So," shouted Cook, "what good will it do us when the rest of him just disappeared into the pantry?" "I don't know," said Midge. She braced herself as Cook advanced upon her, intent on giving her a good clout to the ear. "I don't know." And here's a picture of our poor Desperaux. Chapter 35, The Knight in Shining Armor. Desperaux was pondering the reverse of that question. He was wondering not what he would do with his tail, but what he would do without it. He was sitting on a bag of flour, high atop a shelf in the pantry, crying for what he had lost. The pain in his hindquarters was intense, and he wept because of it. He also cried because he was happy. He was out of the dungeon, and he'd be recalled to life. His rescue had happened just in time for him to save the Princess P from the terrible fate the rat had planned for her. So Desperaux wept with joy and pain and with gratitude. He wept with exhaustion and despair and hope. He wept with all the emotions a young small mouse who'd been sent to his death and then been delivered from it in time to save its beloved can feel. Reader, the mouse wept, and then he lay down on a sack of flour and slept. Outside the castle, the sun set and the stars came out one by one, and then they disappeared and gave way to the rising sun, and still Desperaux slept. And while he slept, he dreamt. And he dreamt of the stained glass windows and the dark of the dungeon. In Despereaux's dream, the light came to life, brilliant and glorious in the shape of a knight swinging a sword, a knight fought the dark, and the dark took many shapes. First the dark was his mother, uttering phrases in French. Then the dark became his father, beating the drum, and the dark was Furlough, wearing a black hood and shaking his head no. And the dark became a huge rat, smiling a smile that was evil and sharp. The dark, Desperaux cried, turning his head to the left. The light, he murmured, turning his head to the right. He called out to the night. He shouted, "Who are you? Will you save me?" But the night did not answer him. "Tell me who you are!" Desperaux shouted. The knight stopped swinging his sword. He looked at Desperaux. "You know me," he said. "No," said Desperaux, "I don't." "You do," said the knight. He slowly took the armor off his head and revealed nothing. No one. The suit of armor was empty. "Oh, no, no," said Desperaux. "There's no knight in shining armor. It's all just make-believe, like happily ever after." And in his sleep reader, the small mouse began to cry. Chapter 36. What Midge Carried. And while the mouse slept, Roscuro but put his terrible plan into effect. Would you like to hear, reader, how it all unfolded? The story is not a pretty one. There's violence in it, and cruelty. But stories that are not pretty have a certain value too, I suppose. Everything, as you well know, having lived in this world long enough to have figured out a thing or two for yourself, cannot always be sweetness and light. Listen, this is how it happened. First, the rat finished once and for all the job he'd started a long time ago. He chewed through Gregory's rope, all the way through it, so that the jailer became lost in the maze of the dungeon. Late at night, the castle was dark. The serving girl, Midgery Sow, climbed the stairs to the princess's room, and in her hand she carried a candle, and in the pockets of her apron 2 very ominous things. In the right pocket, hidden in case they should encounter anyone on the stairs, was a rat with a spoon on his head and a cloak of red around his shoulders. In the left pocket was a kitchen knife, the same knife Midgery Sow had used to cut off the tail of a certain mouse. There were the things, rats and a knife and a candle, that Midge carried with her as she climbed up the stairs. "Gore!" she shouted to the rat. "Dark, ain't it?" "Yes," whispered Roscuro from her pocket. "It's quite dark, my dear." "When I'm princess," began Midge. "Shh," said Roscuro. "May I suggest you keep your glorious plans for the future to yourself? And may I further suggest you keep your voice down to a whisper? We are, after all, on a covert mission. Do you know how to whisper, my dear?" "I do," shouted Midge. "Then please," Roscuro said, "please institute this knowledge immediately." "Gore," whispered Midge. "All right." "Thank you," said Roscuro. "Do I need to review with you again our plan of action?" "I got it all straight right here in my head," whispered Midge. She tapped the side of her head with one finger. "How comforting," said Roscuro. "Perhaps, my dear, we should go over it again. One more time, just to be sure." "Well," said Midge, "we're going to the princess' room, and she'll be sleeping and snoozing and snoring, and I will wake her up and show her the knife and say, 'If you does not want to get hurt, princess, you must come with me.'" "And you will not hurt her," said Roscuro. "No, I won't, because I want her to live so she can be my lady in waiting when I become the princess." "Exactly," said Roscuro. "That will give her divine comeuppance." "Gore," whispered Midge, "her divine comeuppance." Midge had, of course, no idea what the phrase divine comeuppance meant, but she very much liked the sound of it, and she repeated it over and over to herself until Roscuro said, "And then," continued Midge, "I tells her to get out of her princess bed and come with me on a little journey." "Ha," said Roscuro, "a little journey. That's right. Ha! I love the understatement of that phrase, a little journey. Oh, it'll be a little journey. Indeed it will." "And then," said Midge, now coming to her favorite part of the plan, "we caper to the deep downs, and we give her some long lessons on how to be a serving girl, and we gives me some short lessons on how to be a princess, and when we is all done studying up, we switch places. I gets to be the princess, and she gets to be the maid. Gore." Reader, this is the very plan Roscuro presented to Midge when he first met her. It was, of course, a ridiculous plan. No one would ever, not for a blind minute, mistake Midge for the princess, or the princess for Midge. But Midgery Sow, as I pointed out to you before, was not the sharpest knife in the drawer, and reader, too, she wanted so desperately to become a princess. She wanted, oh, how she wanted. And it was because of this terrible wanting that she was able to believe in Roscuro's plan with every ounce of her heart. The rat's real plan was, in any way, more simple and more terrible. He intended to take the princess to the deepest, darkest part of the dungeon. He intended to have Midge put chains on the princess's hands and feet, and he intended to keep the glittering, glowing, laughing princess there in the dark forever. That is the end of chapter 26.